on, keep it on, got to keep it on. Through the strength of your mind, you can be set free. You can know what's on your back. Search deep inside, and you will see. Time has come and gone. Try to let me know that you keep on, let's keep on pressing on.
My name is Maisha Ongoza, and Maisha means life. It's really Maisha Weusi Ongoza, black life. Weusi is black. And Ongoza is a form of leadership, means leadership in Kiswahili, someone who takes on responsibility. I was attracted to Kawaida before I met Malana. My husband and I, we were in an organization starting in 1968 in a Kawaida Formation in Philadelphia called the Urban Survival Training Institute. And Milan was all the way here on the West Coast, so we didn't meet him until in the 70s. Once he was released, I think that's the first time I met him when he came back after his incarceration. So between then, you know, I was just in the Kawaida Formation, the Urban Survival Training Institute, and the Congress of African People. Well, I had been active as a student. We were fighting then. I was out of high school, like my first year out of high school, second year. We were fighting for Black Studies, Black History to be taught in the public schools in Philadelphia. So I was involved with some of that organizing because my sister was still in school, and my father knew that she was involved, and my younger sister, and he wanted to make sure that she was protected, and I was older because he figured that I pulled her into this activism. So I was going to the meetings with her and had to go to demonstrations and stuff with her to make sure she would be okay. And so this is when like SNCC and CORE and all them were becoming more nationalistic. They were pulling away from just civil rights. So CORE had the Urban Survival Training Institute, which was the cultural nationalist arm of that particular chapter in Philadelphia. And they offered classes. They offered consciousness raising classes. They had different people come in and teach. So I was going there for different meetings and information meetings, organizing meetings. And then we started to hear this brother who was the head of Urban Survival Training Institute, Kasisi Yakobo. Kasisi was a Kawaida rank. It was one of the priesthood ranks.
Oh.
And he would speak and talk. And he just impressed my husband and I so much, you know, with the structure of it. And he had this young Simbas there. And we just became very more impressed with that than the other speakers that came from other organizations. And my husband had been in RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement. He had been a part of their Black Guard, which was the youth arm. So he was used to having structure and discipline. And so he was attracted to the Simbas that were there. Yeah.
So what made that formation different from other Black Power or Black freedom organizations?
Because they talk more about Africa. They talk more about culture, you know, the importance of values, the importance of values, of directing you. The other ones weren't talking about that. So a lot of your contradictions you had, you know, you just could be active, but you didn't have to change anything else about your life. And so, you know, this demanded some, you know, changes in your life. And we thought we needed to make some changes in our life, you know. We know everybody has contradictions and everything. And we just liked the direction that it offered. You just much more that you had to just do than just come out and march. What you had to do to overturn yourself too. So it was important to us.
So what values did you find so compelling at the time that drew you into the organization?
Well, it wasn't unity because everybody was unifying around issues, you know. So it wasn't that one. That's what got us there, that people were working together. But the ones around self-determination, definitely around cooperative economics, because I come from a family of entrepreneurs. And so we always knew the importance of having your own businesses and the community supporting you. And that's how my family survived, you know, that my father and his brothers had kind of contract and paper hanging business, and 99% of their clients were the community. And every now and then they get some work from a bank, some property the bank foreclosed on, and when it fits up, they would get that. But the majority of the work came from the Black community. So I saw that, saw that happen, that my family could survive like that, and how my father, my brother gave back, in other ways and supporting other people. So that one was impressing me also. And the principle about the creativity of making things better, because I've always been like a real creative person, and pushing the importance of that, of making things better than how you inherited them. Those are the ones I really. For a while, my first, the name that they were considering giving me was Imani, was one of the principals, Imani. But the naming ceremony, Maisha won out. It was funny, it was going to be Imani. So
Yeah, say more about the naming ceremony. How did you pick your name, or how were
I
your
didn't
name
pick it.
designated?
Yakoba gave us our names after talking with us and seeing how we interact and trying to see what our best strengths were. And at the time I was crazy. I was a pre-med. I was on my way into med, so he thought I was going to be into life saving and all this here kind of stuff. So I guess that's where it came from. But first it was going to be Imani. Everybody was leaning towards that. But it was a collective decision making. And my husband was given the name Kauli. And it means one who speaks his mind. Because he was just very forward and never holding back. And,
Right.
So it was a collective, and everyone reached a consensus on how we got the names. That's how we named the children in the organization. We started having children. We all put the names in, or the attributes we would like for them to have, and that. Yeah.
So what are your children's names?
My firstborn was Upaji. It meant to the generous person. The second, Kiongozi. So it's an offshoot of Ongoza. It's Kiongozi, which means leader. So his name is a leader of leaders. And then my daughter is Milele Inyota, which means the eternal star. Not like a bright star, like a guiding star, like the star that guided Harriet Tubman, that we look for to find our way to freedom. That kind of eternal star that's always going to be something from the ancestors to guide us to freedom. That's how she was named.
Is there something bigger than yourself that Kawaida is organized around?
Yes, the people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The people itself. African people itself.
Okay.
That's the bigger concept in terms of the sustaining and developing and protecting African people. That's the bigger concept. Us as a people, and the continent itself as a sacred place. Where humankind began, and so those two concepts, I think, is the bigger one, because we was always supportive of the liberation movements, and I think the first time I got exposed to us being concerned about the environment and how what was happening about the resources, and was through a Kawaida. Before I didn't think about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, how did your understanding of Blackness differ from before you heard about Kawaida versus after you heard about Kawaida?
Well, I had some concept of Blackness because I have my older sister was in the Nation of Islam. She was one of the ones they call First Resurrection. She went in early.
Oh.
And she has 10 years on me. She was like my mother. She's my sister, but she's my mother's sister because she helped raise me. So first, before she was in the Nation of Islam, she was a more science. So I was exposed to these things real young with her, with her walking around with little fez and back and studying. She was young. And then she joined the Nation of Islam. And so all around it was the papers and her challenging my father and other people in the house. Because our house was a gathering place where people came. So she would get on about drinking or cussing or eating pork.
Right.
So it was very contentious, because nobody else was into this stuff then. And I went to the mosque with her, and I didn't know until a few years later. She had told me who was there, because Malcolm was the minister for a while in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
And I remember her taking me to the mosque, and I remember I didn't know it was Malcolm at the time, and and I just remember I was terrified because he threw the Bible on the floor and stumped it, had this picture of Jesus he tore up. And I wasn't, we weren't raised religious, so we weren't like raised in the church or Christian or anything like that, because, we didn't have a church family or anything like that, but I just knew something was wrong with this, And I'm this child, and there's this angry man that's stumping on the Bible, and and I like ran and hid in the closet in the
Wow.
house.
Wow. So Malcolm did that?
Yeah.
Wow.
In Philly. And I didn't know. She told me later on that was Malcolm. She said, "Remember, you got real scared and all this there." And I said, "Yeah." She said, "That was Malcolm." I said, "Man, I missed a great opportunity." Start talking about it later. But yeah. So I was exposed before Kawaida to this through my sister.
Mm-hmm.
Through my sister. And I remember in high school when Kennedy was killed. And they let our school out early. And I come home and I was bawling and crying. You know, everybody's upset when Kenny was, and she just straightened me out. What are you crying over that devil? What did he do for you? You know? So this is I got this early, you know, from her. So it wasn't hard for me to connect it once I was getting older and start to notice more things with civil rights and things were happening in our neighborhood and stuff. So it wasn't a big leap for me.
Yeah, gotcha. How about, so you must have had a Black aesthetic, like in terms of Black art, like the imagery of Blackness was seen as beautiful when you were coming up in terms of that? Or where did the idea of like, the Kawaida idea of speaking African languages, having an African name for everything, why did that become important to you?
Well, I saw some of it through my sister, but more of hers was like this Asiatic kind of influence, and when at her place, you know, her decor was, you know, was this everything was low on the floor, and she had these beautiful things in the house and beautiful artwork and pieces. So I just always liked it, and I remember helping her sew. It was always her sewing, making curtains and things, and would help her make Muslim outfits and that kind of stuff. So through her, I saw that it was a different way of addressing and seeing beauty and things than how we had in our house. You know, we just had just furniture in the house, but everything seemed so intentional about what she wanted in the house and the images she wanted around her children. So that was like kind of my first exposure to it. Then to hear that reinforced through Kawaida from more of an African frame of reference and not just Arab culture and this kind of thing. I think it was that kind of.
So while other African Americans are seeing Africa as something distant or something in the past or something in the origins, you were seeing Africa having contemporary meaning, right?
Yeah.
Present meaning. How did you relate to other African Americans in the sense that you were finding meaning, contemporary meaning in ancient African legacies? How does that work? In terms of the struggle for liberation, how does that work?
Well, like with Kwanzaa, right? Our children were one of the first in Philadelphia to celebrate Kwanzaa. And I just remember early my father being upset, my god mom. And I told him no more Christmas, no more Santa Claus, you know. And they were really upset about this area. Like ready to call child welfare. You know, we're depriving the children, everything. But we held fast to it and everything. And I would tell my father why. And everyone else who was wondering why we wasn't doing this anymore. It's not like we were raised religious, but you know, Christmas is like, you know, bedrock in everybody's family. And so to hold the line on that and not, you know, participating in Thanksgiving, you know, that kind of stuff. And so the family, we were a little alienated in the beginning from everyone except my sister, the Muslim.
Right.
You know, she was happy. I wasn't a Muslim. I never became a Muslim, but she was glad I just wasn't Negro.
Right.
You know? So there was it was a little alienation in the beginning. But I had the foresight to not let it become real antagonistic, that I would still go around my father, still spend time with everyone, and kind of wore him away because he's beginning to see the difference in my children than in his other grands and other children that he knew, until he just understood it. And he was telling people, you ought to tell your children about this Kwanzaa. You know, and he became very supportive over it. So one of the things I think through Kawaida did was the importance of family and not letting these kind of things interfere. The family's most important. And one of the first teachings I think of Milana that always helped me to not be contentious with people was he always say the person is more important than the point. And that was one of the early Kawaida teachings, that people are more important than the point. If you keep the people, you got a chance to make your point later on. But if you lose them and alienate them, what's the point? You know, all you got is your point.
Right.
You know, so that was always something that's always like guided me in all my relationships and stuff, that the people are more important than the point.
How do you define Kawaida to people who don't know anything about it?
I tell them it's a way of life, right? It's a way of life, centering myself around the ancestors and the respect for each other and respect for nature and respect for the beauty and our legacy and our responsibility. And so I kind of explain it like that. People can understand that. You know, I don't ever talk in God terms or like that, but just how it has me relating to other people and to other things. So I talk about it more relational, so they can connect to it. You know, not in like real abstract way. I said the importance of family, the importance of community, the importance of the nation, and people can relate to it when you give them examples they can, you know, they can understand, as opposed to something real abstract, you know.
How do you introduce Kwanzaa to people who are just completely unfamiliar with it?
Well, you know, I'll talk about the principles first, and how do they learn, you know, about getting along with others, or being able to speak for themselves. You know, it depends on who the audience is developmentally, but I begin with the practice of the principles that they're doing it, but they haven't gave it a label or codified it or something like that. But they don't have problems with the principles. So once you get them to see that's the foundation of Kwanzaa, and that they're doing it, most of them, if they're being honest, or they need to be doing it more, and they know which ones they wish they could work on more. But I always focus on the practice of the principles first, and get them to see they're doing it. Once you want your children to be self-determining, you know, they can push back on bullies. They don't have other students telling, you know, I put it in those sorts of ways for them. I said, well, in Kiswahili, that's kuji chakalia. So I do that kind of, you know, give them these parallels to see they're doing it. They just haven't codified it or put it in a cultural framework that it is, and to make it more understanding for them. Then explain the symbols in that way too, and comparing it to something like the foundation is the straw mat. And you know, I'll tell them, you can't stand on this floor. This floor is our foundation. If it wasn't strong, you wouldn't be able to stand up on it. You know, so I give real concrete examples so that so they can understand it. I don't keep it real abstract and say the straw was come from some special place. And you know, some things I hear people say, what is this? You know, it's for them to understand, to be able to internalize it. They have to have some way to connect to it and see that it's already in their life, or it need to be. Yeah.
So can you give some illustrations of how you use the Nguzo Saba or Kawaida for community building in Philadelphia?
Okay. Well, you know, it's such a part of my life. One of the things Malana had told us, that we used to use it for what they call self-inventory at the end of the day, that you use the Nguzo Saba to see how you held up. You go through each principle. He said, not in the beginning of the day when you're feeling strong, when you had a good night's sleep. He would say, you do it at the end of the day after you've been beat down, these little microaggressions, and were you able to maintain unity, and when you're ready to curse somebody out, and you know, you still have faith after seeing some awful stuff with other people. So to use it at the end of the day as a checklist, and some days you can check off all 7, some days you can't, you know? So for me, that's one of the ways I do it. I go through it every night, and I say, man, I just blew this one, you know, this kind of stuff, and I said, I got to work more on it. And professionally, I have used it as a teacher, especially when I was in independent schools. We actually graded students according to the Nguzo Saba. They didn't get A grades, B, C. They got grades on how they practiced the Nguzo Saba in the classroom. And it was on the report card. That was part of the categories in the assessing of students. So, when I was in education, we used it in that way. I was a part of a national formation called the Family Resource Coalition. It was based in Chicago, but there were family support organizations from around the country, really outside of the country. And I was directing a family center in Philadelphia at the time called Madeira. And it was the first community-based, community-driven family center. and where it was really being shaped by what the needs were of the community, and so they heard about this work I was doing there, and they invited me to come to Chicago. They started to publish a magazine, and they commissioned me to write an article about how I've been doing this work about strengthening families and using Afrocentric instruments. So I wrote this, I developed it, and it was published widely, I mean, all over the place. To Native American, there was some Native American members of this group. They published in their publication because they saw the same needs in their community on the reservation. So they wound up republishing this article about the Nguza Saba, and another one I wrote about Saruj Ta, and using that on strengthening and building communities. And the Native Americans published it also.
Wow.
So, so it was like, trying to make practical use of these teachings that come out of Kawaida and come from Maulana, so that people can have it to help strengthen them. And I was just really impressed when the Native Americans took a lot. Well, I was okay. The Latinos did too, but the Native Americans, they contacted me and asked could they republish it, and it was in the newspapers and different things. That meant a lot to me, that they found that kind of beauty in it, and that they were having the same kind of challenges of their people, losing their identity and being alienated and things. So it was published. It was been used in a couple of training manuals for family support workers, and it's been republished in that. And so I was just really proud of that. And Maulana was why I sent them to him and Tia Moyo, and they gave me really good feedback on it. And
So explain what Saruj Ta is.
Saruj Ta is a concept that comes out of ancient Egypt, and Maulana said the glyphs for it is a male and a female, and they're holding up the pillars in Egypt that been knocked down. We don't know how it was knocked down, through war or through an earthquake, but the male and the female are both uplifting it, rising it. So Saruj Ta is about rebuilding, recreating, bringing things back to normal, things that's been in disarray, and lifting it back up and repairing and strengthening it, and so it can go on. And so that's kind of like how I viewed our families and our community. So I wrote this this piece about Saruj Ta and families, and how what we have to do to lift our own families back up.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I like about Kawaida. You just don't accept things at face value. You have to know where it comes from. Look for where it comes from. As he always says, whose interest does it serve?
Right.
That kind of thing. Where does it come from? And so I like that ability to be able to do that.
And he talks about the cultural crisis as the key crisis.
The cultural crisis is a key crisis.
Right.
And I know that when you see people doing things that are so harmful to themselves, and not even able to look out for their own best interests. It's things they know is not good, and they still caught up in. It's basically, it's a value issue of them not seeing that as just a destructive kind of dysfunctional kind of thing that's happening.
If we were going to do a new quotable Karenga, like Karenga-isms, what type of sayings of Karenga have been meaningful to you personally and stuff that you've used in your community organizing?
Yeah, well, this one, the person is more important than the point.
Right.
It's another one from Alana, when you're making a decision about something, and you kind of like, which way should I, like if you're voting, which way, you ask yourself, what does it do to the people? What does it do for the people? And how do they participate in it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been very important to me, because I've been in jobs where things can be split right down the middle, and I might be to decide and vote on something, and I just go through that in my mind. I write it down. I got like this pro and con, and I use that rubric, that matrix, for in terms of decision making about something I think is going to have a lot of impact. And I've worked for city government for quite a few years around on policy and stuff, and this is it. And so if people, and I've been in a lot of struggles, and this has helped me, I think, always be on the right side of the issues, and having that. So that one I definitely would say is really important in there, and the one about the person being more important than the point. that just cools you out a lot, and understanding the importance of trying to hold on to each other and trying to remain engaged. And then the other one about unity, criticism, unity. We come in unity, we work it out, and we leave in unity. You know, so the importance of always still leaving, working together. So those are the kind of things I would like to see.
How are the sacred texts meaningful to you, and what type of things do you draw from that?
Well, the Hussein is next to my bed.
Okay.
I just open it and read it, you know. And I have my favorites, kind of ones I go to. I haven't felt as attached to the Odu as much as the Hosea. And it's just, you can just find different ways in your life you can relate to with it. Even though we're talking, you know, you're talking about places, about deserts and wells and all. You can translate that to the store in the corner, or, you know, it's just that kind of way. It's just so easily, it's so portable, so transportable. So that's how I see it. The lessons from it are so transportable. If you kind of like don't lock your mind in, we're talking about thousands of years ago. If you can think about what is a current, a contemporary situation that's very similar to what you're reading about, and the problematics of it, and how it was solved and everything, and what are the lessons from it, the value lessons from it. So those things I do. I talk with when I teach, when I was using it, we had freedom schools in Philly, and I would use a passage from the Hussein or an Nguza Saba or something from the Odu every day. It's a passage the students had to relate to, and the staff did too. And at the end of the day, we do a debrief, and I ask them, do we find anything that related to these passages today? So I make them look for this, look for these things. Did we see it, or if we didn't see it, we saw something in contradiction to it. So, and the staff loved it. You know, when I would go away, they was like, who's going to pick these for the day? You know, so because I would always come here every summer, freedom schools during the summer. So they would continue that. They really enjoyed that discussion, and the students would too, and using African proverbs like that because of the value lessons in it, and always having them relate to it in a way, demonstrate how they relate to it. And I do the same thing with the Nguza Saba, and teaching it to children during Kwanzaa. I give prizes out. They give me an example of how they practice a principle.
Wow.
They had to give me a current, because I'm really, like Milana said, practice proves everything.
When you travel around the country and you meet people, what would you say would define the characteristics of a Kawaida person, that you know that person is a Kawaida person? What do they do? What do they look? What do they say that you would say that's a Kawaida person?
Well, they're always very attentive, making sure you're okay, and you need anything, and that kind of thing. Just very attentive and just very helpful. And it's always very respectful, you know, and you can feel the strength, like the sturdy, the shortness with them, not like any uncertainty. So you can always, that to me, the reaching out and wanting to be engaged and making sure you're okay.
Let me know that you keep on, let's keep on pressing on. Try to let me know that you can have